She thought security would feel like safety, like warmth, like home. Instead, it felt like drowning in silk sheets, suffocating under the weight of everything she thought she wanted. This is the story of a woman who married for all the right reasons, except one. She married for stability, for comfort, for a future that looked perfect on paper. But somewhere along the way, in a house filled with expensive furniture and empty conversations, she realized that security without love isn't freedom at all. It's just a prettier prison. And by the time she understood what she'd traded away, the door had already locked behind her. This is a story about choices, consequences, and the quiet tragedy of getting exactly what you asked for. If you're drawn to stories that explore the darker corners of human relationships, the psychology behind our decisions, and the price we pay for playing it safe, then you're in the right place. Consider subscribing to Love, Lies, and Crimes, where we explore the complicated truth behind relationships that look perfect from the outside, but unravel in ways no one sees coming. Her name was Eleanor Whitmore, though everyone called her Ellie. She grew up in a modest household in suburban Connecticut, the daughter of a school teacher and a postal worker. Her childhood wasn't marked by poverty, but it was defined by caution, by careful budgeting, by the constant awareness that money was finite and mistakes were expensive. Her parents loved her deeply, but their love came wrapped in warnings. Don't be reckless, don't trust too easily, don't expect the world to hand you anything. Plan ahead, be smart, protect yourself. These weren't cruel lessons, they were survival lessons, passed down from people who had learned them the hard way. Ellie absorbed every word. She was a good student, responsible and driven, the kind of girl who color-coded her notes and never missed a deadline. She wasn't particularly popular, but she didn't mind. Popularity seemed frivolous, a distraction from the real work of building a stable future. She had goals. She wanted a career, a home, a life that didn't require her to check her bank account before buying groceries. She wanted to feel secure in a way her parents never quite had, and she was willing to work for it. But there was something else, too, something quieter and harder to name. Ellie wanted to be loved. She watched romantic movies and read novels about sweeping passion and soulmates, and part of her longed for that, for someone who would look at her like she was the center of the universe. But another part of her, the louder, more practical part, dismissed those fantasies as childish. Love, she told herself, was unpredictable. It made people do stupid things, it clouded judgment, it led to heartbreak and financial ruin, and lives derailed by poor decisions. Security, on the other hand, was something you could build, something you could count on. And so, even as a teenager, Ellie made a quiet promise to herself. She would be smart, she would be careful, she wouldn't let her heart make decisions her head couldn't defend. She met Daniel Harrington during her junior year of college. She was studying business administration at a state university, working 2 part-time jobs to cover her expenses, and he was a guest speaker in one of her economics classes. Daniel was 32, 11 years older than Ellie, and already successful in ways that seemed almost unreal to her. He owned a consulting firm that worked with mid-sized corporations, helping them streamline operations and maximize profits. He wore tailored suits and expensive watches, and when he spoke, people listened. He had the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money, from growing up in a world where opportunities were abundant and failure was just a temporary setback. Ellie was mesmerized, not by him exactly, but by what he represented: stability, success, a life without financial anxiety. After his talk, she approached him with a question about market forecasting, something thoughtful and well-researched. He was impressed. They exchanged emails, he invited her to coffee to continue the conversation, and she said yes, telling herself it was professional networking, nothing more. But Daniel had other ideas. He found her intelligence attractive, her ambition refreshing. Most of the women he dated, he said, were more interested in his money than his mind, but Ellie was different. She asked real questions, she challenged his ideas. She wasn't trying to impress him, she was trying to learn from him, and he found that intoxicating. Within weeks, coffee turned into dinners, dinners turned into weekend trips. And before Ellie fully understood what was happening, she was in a relationship with a man who could offer her everything she'd ever wanted. Daniel was generous, almost extravagantly so. He took her to restaurants she couldn't have afforded on her own, bought her gifts that made her uncomfortable at first, though she learned to accept them. He paid off her student loans without asking, just handed her a check one evening and told her he didn't want her worrying about debt. It should have felt romantic, and in a way it did, but there was also something transactional about it, something that made Ellie feel less like a girlfriend and more like a project and investment. Still, she pushed those feelings aside. Daniel cared about her, she told herself. He wanted to help her. And wasn't that a kind of love, too? Wasn't providing for someone, protecting them, making their life easier, wasn't that what love looked like in the real world? They were married less than a year after they met, a small ceremony attended mostly by Daniel's colleagues and a few of Ellie's family members. Her parents seemed cautiously pleased. They liked Daniel well enough, though her mother pulled her aside the night before the wedding and asked her quietly if she was happy. Ellie said yes, and she meant it, or at least she thought she did. She was happy in the way someone is happy when they've made a smart decision, when they've secured a good future. Wasn't that enough? Her mother didn't press further, just squeezed her hand and told her she hoped Ellie knew what she was doing. The first year of marriage was an adjustment. They moved into Daniel's house, a sprawling 4-bedroom property in an affluent neighborhood, the kind of place Ellie had only seen in magazines. It was beautiful, pristine, and utterly impersonal. Daniel had decorated it himself, or rather, he'd hired someone to decorate it, and the result was a showroom, not a home. Everything matched, everything was expensive, and nothing felt like hers. Ellie tried to make small changes, to add touches that reflected her personality, a throw pillow here, a framed photo there, but Daniel always had an opinion. That color doesn't really work with the aesthetic we're going for. Maybe we should keep the mantle clear, it looks cleaner that way. He told himself he just had strong preferences, that it wasn't a big deal, but slowly, incrementally, she stopped trying. It was easier to live in his space than to fight for her own. Her career became another point of tension, though it was never framed that way. Daniel encouraged her to finish her degree, even helped her get an internship at one of his client companies, but once they were married, his support became more conditional. He didn't say she couldn't work, but he made it clear he didn't see the point. Why stress yourself out with a 9-to-5 when you don't need the money? You could focus on other things, the house, us, starting a family. Ellie hesitated. She'd always imagined herself working, building a career, having her own income, but Daniel's arguments were persuasive. Why struggle for a modest salary when she could live comfortably without it? Why spend 40 hours a week in an office when she could enjoy the life they'd built together? And so, piece by piece, she let go of her ambitions. She told herself it was a choice, that she was choosing ease over stress, comfort over struggle. But deep down, she knew the truth. She wasn't choosing, she was surrendering. The days blurred together. Ellie filled her time with activities that felt productive but weren't really. She took yoga classes, attended charity luncheons with Daniel's colleagues' wives, volunteered at a local food bank. She kept the house immaculate, cooked elaborate dinners that Daniel barely noticed, and tried to convince herself that this was fulfillment. But the emptiness was undeniable. She had no coworkers to bond with, no projects to pour herself into, no sense of purpose beyond maintaining a life that didn't feel like hers. She was lonely, desperately so, but she couldn't articulate why. She had everything she was supposed to want: a beautiful home, financial security, a husband who provided for her. What right did she have to feel unfulfilled? Daniel, for his part, seemed content. He worked long hours, traveled frequently for business, and when he was home, he was often distracted, his mind still on deals and deadlines. He wasn't unkind to Ellie, but he wasn't particularly present either. Their conversations were surface level, logistics and pleasantries with little depth. They had sex occasionally, more out of routine than passion, and Ellie found herself going through the motions, performing intimacy rather than feeling it. She wondered sometimes if Daniel noticed, if he cared, but he never said anything, and neither did she. It was easier to pretend everything was fine. Money became the language of their relationship. Daniel controlled all the finances, not in an overtly controlling way, but simply because he always had. He paid the bills, managed the investments, made the major financial decisions. Ellie had access to his credit cards, could buy whatever she wanted within reason, but she had no real understanding of their financial situation. She didn't know how much they had, how much they spent, what their long-term plans were. And when she asked, Daniel brushed her off. "Don't worry about it. That's my job. You don't need to stress over numbers." It sounded considerate, protective even, but it left Ellie feeling powerless, like a child being told the adults would handle it. She started to notice other things too, the way Daniel made decisions without consulting her, assuming she'd go along with whatever he wanted. The way he dismissed her opinions when they differed from his, not aggressively, but with a kind of benign condescension, a smile and a pat on the hand and a reminder that he knew better. The way he framed his generosity as a reason for her gratitude, never explicitly, but the implication was always there. "I gave you this life. I took care of you. What more do you want?" Ellie tried to push back sometimes, to assert herself, but it always ended the same way. Daniel would remain calm, reasonable, unflappable, and she'd end up feeling unreasonable by comparison, ungrateful, irrational, and so she stopped pushing. It was easier to stay quiet. The isolation deepened. Ellie's friendships from college had faded, partly from distance and busy lives, but partly because she'd stopped reaching out. What would she even talk about? Her days were so empty, so devoid of real experience, that she felt she had nothing to contribute. The women she met through Daniel's social circle were pleasant enough, but their interactions felt performative, everyone playing a role, smiling through the same polite conversations about renovations and vacation plans and which charity gala was worth attending. Ellie smiled along, played her part, and felt more alone than ever. She thought about leaving sometimes, late at night when Daniel was asleep and the house was silent. She'd lie awake and imagine what it would be like to walk away, to reclaim her independence, to build a life on her own terms. But the thought was terrifying. Where would she go? She had no job, no income, no savings of her own. She'd been out of the workforce for years. Who would hire her? And even if she could find work, how would she afford to live? The life she'd built with Daniel, as empty as it felt, was also safe. Leaving meant risking everything, plunging into uncertainty, and Ellie had spent her whole life avoiding exactly that. So she stayed, and every day she stayed, leaving became a little harder. The breaking point came, as these things often do, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet, devastating realization. It was a Tuesday afternoon, unremarkable in every way. Ellie was folding laundry in the bedroom, the television on in the background, some talk show she wasn't really watching. Daniel was away on a business trip, as he often was, and the house felt cavernous and still. She caught her reflection in the mirror and stopped, really looked at herself. She was 34 years old, well-dressed, well-maintained, living in a beautiful home, and she felt nothing. Not happiness, not sadness, not anger, just a vast, aching emptiness. She realized, standing there with a pillowcase in her hands, that she had no idea who she was anymore. She'd spent so long trying to be what Daniel wanted, what she thought she was supposed to be, that she'd erased herself in the process. She was a wife, a homemaker, a decorative piece in Daniel's carefully curated life, but she wasn't Ellie. She didn't even know what Ellie wanted anymore. That night, she did something she hadn't done in years. She pulled out an old journal from college, one she'd kept during her early 20s, filled with dreams and plans and ambitions. She read through it, page after page of a younger, more hopeful version of herself, and she cried. Not because she'd failed to achieve those dreams, though she had, but because she'd forgotten they existed. She'd traded them away so easily, so willingly for the promise of security, and now, holding the evidence of who she used to be, she felt the full weight of what she'd lost. The next few months were a blur of internal turmoil. Ellie started seeing a therapist, something she did in secret, paying with cash she skimmed from household expenses. She didn't tell Daniel. She wasn't sure why, except that it felt like the first thing she'd done for herself in years, and she wanted to keep it hers. The therapist, a kind woman in her 50s named Dr. Patel, listened without judgment as Ellie poured out her frustrations, her regrets, her fears. Dr. Patel didn't tell her what to do, but she asked questions that forced Ellie to confront truths she'd been avoiding. What do you want? Not what you think you should want, not what makes sense, but what do you actually want? Ellie didn't have an answer at first. She'd spent so long not asking herself that question that she'd forgotten how. But slowly, answers began to emerge. She wanted autonomy. She wanted purpose. She wanted to feel like her life belonged to her, not to someone else's vision of what her life should be. She didn't necessarily want to leave Daniel, not at first, but she wanted things to change. She wanted a partnership, not a benevolent dictatorship. She wanted to be seen, heard, valued as an equal. And she wanted to stop being so afraid all the time, afraid of disappointing him, afraid of losing her security, afraid of being alone. Ellie decided to talk to Daniel. She planned it carefully, rehearsed what she would say, tried to anticipate his responses. She waited until a night when he was home, when he seemed relaxed and open, and she sat him down and told him she wasn't happy. She didn't blame him, didn't accuse him of anything, just explained how she felt: invisible, powerless, lonely. She told him she wanted to go back to work, to have her own income, to be more involved in their financial decisions. She told him she wanted them to spend more time together, real time, not just existing in the same space. She told him she needed things to change. Daniel listened, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed, and what he said broke something in her. "Ellie, I've given you everything. You have a beautiful home, financial security, the freedom to do whatever you want with your days. I don't understand what more you could possibly need. If you're bored, find a hobby, join a book club. But asking me to change our entire life because you're feeling a little restless, that's not fair." His tone wasn't angry, just weary, like she was being unreasonable, like her unhappiness was an inconvenience. And in that moment, Ellie understood. He didn't see her as a partner. He saw her as a dependent, someone he'd rescued and provided for, and in return, she was supposed to be happy with what he'd given her, and if she wasn't, that was her failing, not his. She didn't argue. There was no point. She thanked him quietly for listening and went to bed. And lying there in the dark, she made a decision. She was going to leave. Not immediately, she didn't have the resources for that, but she was going to start building an exit. Slowly, carefully, she began to reclaim pieces of herself. She reached out to old contacts, started rebuilding her professional network. She took online courses to update her skills. She opened a bank account in her own name only, started depositing small amounts of money, building a safety net. She didn't tell Daniel any of this. She knew he'd see it as a betrayal, that he'd argue or manipulate or cut off her access to funds. So she worked in silence, in secret, planning her escape. It took almost 2 years. 2 years of living a double life, playing the role of dutiful wife while quietly dismantling the cage she'd built around herself. It was exhausting, emotionally and mentally, and there were times she almost gave up, times when the fear of the unknown nearly sent her back into complacency. But every time she wavered, she remembered that moment with Daniel, the way he'd dismissed her pain so casually, and she found her resolve again. When she finally left, it was anticlimactic. She did it while Daniel was on a business trip, packed her essentials, took half of what was in their joint account, which was legally hers, and walked out. She left a note. brief and polite, explaining that she couldn't be happy in the marriage and needed to build a life of her own. She didn't expect him to understand, and she was right. He called her repeatedly, left voicemails that ranged from confused to angry to pleading. He didn't understand how she could throw away everything they'd built, how she could be so ungrateful, so selfish. He offered to go to counseling, to make changes, but it felt like too little, too late, and Ellie knew it was performative, a last-ditch effort to regain control. She didn't respond. She blocked his number, hired a lawyer, and started divorce proceedings. The months that followed were the hardest of her life. She moved into a tiny studio apartment, worked a job she was overqualified for just to pay the bills, and struggled with crippling self-doubt. Had she made a mistake? Was she being foolish, throwing away security for some vague notion of happiness? But even in the hardest moments, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt alive. She felt like herself. She was scared and struggling and uncertain, but she was free. And that freedom, that sense of agency over her own life, was worth more than any amount of money or comfort. The divorce was messy. Daniel fought her on everything, not because he wanted her back, but because he couldn't stand the idea of her leaving on her terms. He tied up assets, delayed proceedings, made everything as difficult as possible. But Ellie held firm. She had a good lawyer, one who saw through Daniel's tactics, and eventually they reached a settlement. It wasn't as much as she might have gotten if she'd fought harder, but it was enough to give her a fresh start, and that was all she wanted. Rebuilding her life took time. Ellie had to relearn who she was, what she valued, what brought her joy. She reconnected with old friends, made new ones, started dating cautiously, learning to trust her own judgment again. She found work she was passionate about, not the high-powered career she'd once imagined, but something that felt meaningful and allowed her to support herself. She learned to live within her means, to find satisfaction in small things, to stop equating security with happiness, and slowly, piece by piece, she built a life that felt like hers. Looking back, Ellie doesn't regret marrying Daniel, not entirely. That marriage, painful as it was, taught her essential truths about herself. It taught her that security without autonomy is just another form of captivity. It taught her that love, real love, isn't about what someone can give you materially, but about how they make you feel, whether they see you, value you, respect you as an equal. It taught her that the most dangerous prisons are the ones we build for ourselves, the ones that look like safety from the outside, but feel like suffocation from within. She thinks sometimes about other women in similar situations, women who marry for security, for stability, for all the practical reasons that make sense on paper. She wants to tell them what she learned, that security is an illusion if it costs you your sense of self, that no amount of financial comfort is worth living a life that doesn't feel like yours. But she also knows that everyone's journey is different, that some women find happiness in traditional arrangements, that not every marriage like hers ends in quiet desperation. The key, she believes, is awareness. Know why you're making the choices you're making, know what you're trading away, and never, ever give up so much of yourself that you forget who you are. Ellie's story is not unique. There are countless women, and men too, who find themselves trapped in relationships that looked perfect from the outside, but hollowed them out from within. Some leave, as Ellie did, some stay, finding ways to carve out joy and meaning within the constraints they've accepted. And some never realize what they've lost until it's too late, until they wake up one day and can't remember the last time they felt like themselves. The psychology behind these relationships is complex. Marrying for security isn't inherently wrong. Throughout history, practical considerations have played a significant role in partner selection, and there's nothing shameful about wanting financial stability or a comfortable life. The problem arises when those practical considerations come at the expense of emotional connection, mutual respect, and personal autonomy. When one partner holds all the power, financial or otherwise, the relationship becomes inherently unbalanced. And in unbalanced relationships, resentment festers, identities erode, and what looked like security reveals itself to be dependency. Financial control is one of the most insidious forms of abuse because it doesn't look like abuse. There are no bruises, no screaming matches, just a slow, steady erosion of independence. When one person controls all the money, makes all the financial decisions, and treats their partner's access to resources as a privilege rather than a right, they're exercising power in a way that's hard to name but impossible to ignore. The controlled partner may have access to credit cards, may live in luxury, may want for nothing materially, but they're fundamentally powerless. They can't leave without facing financial ruin. They can't make major life decisions without permission. They exist at the mercy of someone else's generosity, and that's not partnership, that's patronage. Emotional emptiness in a relationship can be as devastating as overt cruelty, sometimes more so. When a partner is actively abusive, the problem is clear, the path forward, though difficult, at least obvious. But when a partner is simply absent, emotionally unavailable, treating the relationship like a business arrangement rather than a romantic partnership, the victim is left in limbo. There's nothing specific to point to, no dramatic incident to justify leaving, just a pervasive sense of loneliness, of being unseen, of going through the motions of a life that feels increasingly hollow. And because there's no clear villain, no obvious wrongdoing, the victim often turns the blame inward. Maybe I'm too demanding. Maybe I'm ungrateful. Maybe this is just what marriage is, and I'm being naive to expect more. The societal pressure on women in particular to prioritize security over passion, practicality over fulfillment, compounds the problem. From a young age, many women are taught directly or indirectly that financial stability is paramount, that a good provider is worth more than a passionate partner, that love is a luxury but security is a necessity. These messages are reinforced by economic realities, the gender pay gap, the career penalties for motherhood, the lack of affordable childcare and parental leave. When the world is structured in a way that makes it genuinely difficult for women to achieve financial independence, choosing a partner who can provide starts to look less like a choice and more like a survival strategy. And there's no shame in that. But it's crucial to recognize the trade-offs, to enter those arrangements with open eyes, and to ensure that security doesn't come at the cost of selfhood. Ellie's realization, that moment standing in her bedroom folding laundry, is a turning point that many people in emotionally bankrupt relationships experience. It's the moment when the cognitive dissonance becomes too great, when you can no longer pretend that having everything you thought you wanted is the same as being happy. It's the moment when you stop asking, "Why am I not satisfied?" and start asking, "Who have I become? And do I even like this person?" It's a painful reckoning, but it's also a necessary one, because you can't change a situation you won't acknowledge, and you can't reclaim a life you've convinced yourself is already good enough. The decision to leave is never easy, especially when financial dependence is a factor. Ellie was fortunate in some ways. She had no children to consider, which gave her more flexibility. She had marketable skills, even if they were rusty, which meant she could eventually support herself. And she had just enough savings and settlement money to cushion her landing. But many people in similar situations don't have those advantages. They have children whose stability depends on the marriage. They've been out of the workforce so long that re-entry seems impossible. They have no family support, no safety net, no way to survive financially on their own. For them, leaving isn't just scary, it's genuinely dangerous, a leap into an abyss with no guarantee of anything on the other side. This is why financial independence, even within a marriage, is so crucial. It's not about distrust or planning for failure, it's about maintaining autonomy, ensuring that you always have the option to leave if the relationship becomes untenable. Everyone, regardless of gender, should have access to money they control, should understand the household finances, should have skills and credentials that would allow them to support themselves if necessary. Because the moment you lose the ability to leave, you lose the ability to negotiate, to assert boundaries, to demand respect. And a relationship where one person can't leave isn't a partnership, it's captivity with better furniture. But financial independence alone isn't enough. Ellie had access to money, could have taken Daniel's credit card and bought whatever she wanted, but she was still deeply unhappy because money wasn't the problem. The problem was the absence of emotional connection, the lack of respect, the feeling of being an accessory in someone else's life rather than a fully realized person in her own right. True partnership requires more than financial equity. It requires mutual respect, emotional availability, shared decision-making, and a genuine interest in each other's well-being and growth. It requires seeing your partner as an equal, not a dependent or a project or a trophy. And it requires ongoing effort, communication, and willingness to adapt and grow together. The red flags in Ellie and Daniel's relationship were there from the beginning, though they were easy to miss or rationalize. The age gap, while not inherently problematic, created a power imbalance that Daniel exploited, positioning himself as the worldly, experienced mentor and Ellie as the young, naive student. The speed of the relationship, married within a year, didn't allow time for Ellie to fully understand what she was signing up for. Daniel's control over the finances, framed as him taking care of her, was actually him ensuring she remained dependent. His dismissal of her career ambitions, couched in concern for her stress levels, was him limiting her options and keeping her tied to him. His decoration of the house without her input, his decision-making without her consultation, his condescension when she disagreed with him, all of these were signs that he didn't see her as an equal partner. Recognizing these patterns is crucial, both for people who might be in similar situations and for those who care about them. Emotional abuse and control are often subtle, especially in relationships that look successful from the outside. The controlling partner isn't usually a monster. They're often charming, successful, generous, all the things that make the relationship seem desirable. But beneath that surface, there's a fundamental lack of respect for the other person's autonomy, a need to be in control, a belief that they know better and their partner should simply comply. And the longer the relationship goes on, the harder it becomes to see clearly, to recognize what feels like security is actually dependence, and what looks like love is actually transaction. For Ellie, therapy was transformative. It gave her a space to articulate feelings she'd been suppressing, to examine her choices without judgment, to start rebuilding her sense of self. But therapy isn't accessible to everyone, especially those in controlling relationships, where seeking help might be monitored or punished. This is why community support, whether from friends, family, or organizations that help people leave abusive or controlling relationships, is so vital. No one should have to navigate these situations alone, and sometimes an outside perspective is necessary to see what's really happening. Ellie's story also highlights the importance of maintaining connections outside the relationship. One of the ways controlling partners maintain power is by isolating their victims, cutting them off from friends and family, from work and social activities, until the relationship is the only thing left. Ellie participated in her own isolation to some extent, allowing her friendships to fade, stepping back from her career, but Daniel created an environment where isolation was the path of least resistance. Fighting to maintain outside connections would have required energy and assertiveness that Ellie, worn down by the relationship's dynamics, didn't have. This is why staying connected to people outside your relationship, maintaining your own interests and friendships and professional identity, isn't selfish, it's essential. Those connections are lifelines, reminders that you exist beyond the relationship, that you have value and identity independent of your partner. The aftermath of leaving, the struggle and uncertainty and self-doubt, is a reality that doesn't get talked about enough. We like stories where leaving is the happy ending, where the moment someone walks out the door, their life improves. But the truth is messier. Leaving a relationship, especially one with financial entanglement, is often the beginning of a long, difficult journey. There's grief, even for relationships that were unhealthy, because endings are inherently sad. There's fear about money and the future and whether you've made a terrible mistake. There's loneliness, the ache of building a new life from scratch when everything familiar is gone. And there's the psychological work of undoing the damage, of relearning how to trust yourself, how to set boundaries, how to recognize healthy love when it appears. But there's also freedom and possibility, and the slow, hard-won return of selfhood. Ellie's tiny apartment, her entry-level job, her careful budgeting, all the things that might have looked like failure compared to her life with Daniel, felt like victory because they were hers. She was making her own choices, building her own life, answering to no one but herself, and that sense of agency, that feeling of being the author of her own story, was worth every sacrifice. It's worth considering what draws people into these relationships in the first place. Ellie's background, growing up with financial anxiety, shaped her priorities in profound ways. She associated security with safety, with love even, because her parents had taught her that providing for your family was the highest expression of care. And on some level, Daniel did care for her, in the ways he knew how. He gave her a comfortable life, protected her from financial worry, never raised a hand at her or called her names. By his standards, he was a good husband, but his standards didn't include seeing Ellie as a full person, with needs and desires beyond material comfort. He couldn't understand why she wasn't happy because he'd given her everything he thought mattered, and in his worldview, that should have been enough. This is the tragedy at the heart of relationships like theirs. It's not always malice that drives the controlling partner, though sometimes it is. Sometimes it's just a fundamental inability or unwillingness to see beyond their own perspective, to understand that what they value might not be what their partner values, that their way of showing love might not be what their partner needs. Daniel genuinely believed he was taking care of Ellie, being a good provider, giving her a great life, and by conventional standards, he was. But he never asked what Ellie actually wanted. He never considered that she might need more than financial security, that she might want partnership and purpose and emotional connection. He assumed, and that assumption, multiplied over years, destroyed the relationship. For people reading or hearing this story, the question to ask yourself is this: are you in a relationship because you want to be, or because you're afraid of the alternative? Do you feel seen, valued, respected as an equal? Can you make decisions about your own life, or do you need permission, explicit or implicit? Do you have access to resources, financial and otherwise, that would allow you to leave if you needed to? Are you growing as a person, or shrinking, cutting away pieces of yourself to fit into a space that's too small? These aren't easy questions, and the answers might be uncomfortable, but they're necessary. And if you recognize yourself in Ellie's story, if you feel that same emptiness, that same sense of being a decorative piece in someone else's life, know that you're not crazy, you're not ungrateful, and you're not alone. What you're feeling is real, and it matters, and you deserve more than a beautiful prison. Leaving is hard, maybe the hardest thing you'll ever do, but staying in a relationship that's hollowing you out is harder in the long run. It's a slow death, a gradual erasure of self, and you deserve better. If you're someone who cares about a person in this situation, the best thing you can do is stay connected. Don't judge, don't pressure, just be there. Let them know you're available, that you see them, that you'll support them whatever they decide. Sometimes just knowing there's someone on the outside who cares, who hasn't forgotten them, is enough to keep hope alive. And when they're ready to leave, if they decide to leave, be ready to help in practical ways. Offer a place to stay, help with job searching, provide emotional support. Leaving takes courage, but it also takes resources, and not everyone has them. For those who are in partnerships that work, where practical considerations coexist with love and respect, Ellie's story is still relevant. It's a reminder not to take those things for granted, to actively nurture the emotional connection, to ensure that power remains balanced, that both partners feel valued and heard. It's easy for relationships to drift into patterns where one person makes most of the decisions, controls most of the resources, simply because it's convenient or because that's how things have always been done. But convenience isn't a good reason to accept inequality, and tradition isn't a good reason to perpetuate power imbalances. Healthy relationships require intentionality, ongoing communication, and a commitment to seeing and valuing your partner as a whole person, not just a role they fill. Ellie's journey from trapped wife to independent woman took years, and even now, years after the divorce, she's still processing, still learning, still healing. Some days are easier than others. Some days she feels strong and capable and grateful for her freedom. Other days she feels lonely and wonders if she made a mistake, if she gave up something good in pursuit of something perfect. But even on the hard days, she knows she made the right choice, because she's living her own life now, not the life someone else designed for her. And that, more than anything, is what she needed. This story isn't meant to vilify marriage, or practical considerations in choosing a partner, or financial security as a value. All of those things have their place. The point is that they can't be the only things, and they can't come at the expense of personhood, autonomy, and genuine connection. Security is important, but so is being seen. Comfort is valuable, but so is feeling alive. And no relationship, no matter how perfect it looks from the outside, is worth losing yourself for. As we close this story, think about the relationships in your own life. Are they adding to you or taking from you? Are they helping you grow or asking you to shrink? Are they partnerships or are they transactions? And if you recognize patterns that concern you, whether in your own relationship or someone else's, what are you going to do about it? Awareness is the first step, but action is what changes lives. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think or feel or question, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And leave a comment below with your thoughts. Have you experienced something similar? Do you know someone in a relationship like Ellie's? What would you say to someone who's trying to decide whether to stay or go? These conversations matter, and your perspective could be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Ellie's story is one of quiet tragedy, but also quiet triumph. She lost years to a relationship that diminished her, but she found the courage to reclaim her life. She traded security for freedom, comfort for authenticity, and in doing so, she discovered that the things she was most afraid of losing, stability, safety, belonging, were things she could build for herself. She didn't need someone to give them to her. She just needed to believe she deserved them and to do the hard work of creating them on her own terms. That's the lesson at the heart of this story. Security that costs you your selfhood isn't security at all. Love that requires you to disappear isn't love. And a life that looks perfect from the outside but feels empty on the inside is a life that needs to change, no matter how scary that change might be. Because you only get one life, and you deserve to spend it as yourself, fully and completely, not as a shadow of who you could be. Thank you for listening to this story on love, lies, and crimes, where we explore the complicated, messy, heartbreaking, and ultimately human stories that remind us how fragile and precious our choices are. Remember, the relationships we choose shape the lives we lead, and it's never too late to choose differently.